The first time Gunnery Sergeant Ray Kowalski realized the new neighbor was going to be a serious problem, the man was standing in Ray's handicapped parking spot, not parked in it, not pulling out of it, just standing in it. Arms crossed, sunglasses on at 7 in the morning, smirking at the blue and white placard hanging from Ray's rearview mirror like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Handicapped, the man said, drawing the word out slow, reading the placard like it was a punchline. For what, exactly? Ray said nothing. He sat in his truck. His left leg, what remained of it below the knee, rested against the door panel the way it always did on cold mornings when the phantom pain came back like an old enemy. He watched the man through the windshield. He breathed, slow, steady, the way they taught you. The way 22 years in the United States Marine Corps teaches a man to breathe when everything in his body is screaming. He said nothing. He would wait. Ray Kowalski was very, very good at waiting. Pinehurst Commons. That's the name of the community, a modest, well-kept neighborhood on the eastern edge of Garner, North Carolina, about 14 miles south of Raleigh. It's not a fancy neighborhood. It's not a neighborhood trying to be fancy. It's the kind of place where people mow their own lawns on Saturday mornings and wave at each other from driveways, where kids still ride bikes until the streetlights come on, where someone always brings a casserole when there's been a death on the block. The homes are brick ranches mostly, built in the early 90s, solid and plain and warm, wide driveways, chain-link fences out back where dogs run in circles, flower beds that get replanted every spring whether or not anything ever comes of them. The street is called Longleaf Drive, and in the early spring of 2018 it looked like every postcard America has ever sent itself. Dogwoods were blooming, pink and white petals drifting across the asphalt like slow snow. The air smelled like red clay and fresh-cut grass and just the faintest trace of charcoal from somebody 2 streets over who couldn't wait until May to fire up the grill. It was a quiet street. It was a good street. And then, on a Thursday morning in late March of 2018, a convoy of movers arrived. Let me tell you about Ray Kowalski. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Allen Kowalski, United States Marine Corps, retired. Born 1964 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the second of 4 kids to a steelworker father and a school librarian mother who read to him every night until he could read to himself, and then he never stopped. Ray enlisted in 1983, at 19 years old, 3 days after his high school graduation. He would serve for 22 years. He deployed to Beirut, to the Gulf, to Somalia, to Iraq twice. He trained Marines in Okinawa. He trained Marines at Camp Lejeune. He taught young men how to survive things that no one should have to survive, and he did it with a kind of firm, unshakable calm that everyone who ever served under him remembered for the rest of their lives. He came home for good in 2005. The last deployment, Fallujah, cost him his left leg below the knee. An IED on a road that Intel had cleared. 3 men died that day. Ray's gunnery sergeant, a corporal named Deshaun Tibbs who had a wife and twin daughters back in Georgia, and a 19-year-old lance corporal from Amarillo, Texas who'd only been in country 11 days. Ray survived. He always carried that with him. He moved to Garner in 2007 with his wife, Patricia Patty, who he'd met at a church social in Camp Lejeune back in 1989. Patty was a nurse. She was funny and fierce, and she could make Ray laugh harder than anyone alive. They bought the house at 214 Longleaf Drive together. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a screened back porch where they drank coffee every morning and argued about whether the Carolina Tar Heels or the NC State Wolfpack were the superior team. Ray was Wolfpack. Patty, born and raised in Chapel Hill, was a Tar Heel to her last breath. Patty died of ovarian cancer in 2014. 4 years before any of this happened. Ray still drank his coffee on the back porch every morning. He still argued with her, sometimes quietly when nobody was around. He still had her Tar Heel mug on the shelf right where she left it. He was 63 years old in the spring of 2018. He walked with a carbon fiber prosthetic leg that he'd gotten fairly good at pretending he didn't need. He had a silver beard he trimmed every other Sunday and a 2014 Ram 1500 he kept meticulous. He was the kind of man who brought his neighbor's trash cans in from the curb after collection day, who helped the Nguyen family 3 houses down build a deck the summer before, who kept a jar of peppermint candies on the porch railing for the kids on the block who knew to help themselves. His one visible weakness, if you could call it that, was mornings. The leg hurt in the mornings, always had, always would. He needed that reserved spot in the shared parking area that his HOA had officially designated for him in 2007. It was documented. It was signed. It was his. He also had a notebook. A plain black composition notebook, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $1.99, sitting on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. He'd started keeping it years ago, just a habit really. Dates, names, times, small things he observed. Old military habit, you write it down because memory is mortal and paper is patient. Nobody paid much attention to that notebook. They should have. His name was Bryce Calloway. Bryce Elliott Calloway, 31 years old, founder and CEO of a tech startup called Voxify, a company that, according to its own website, was reimagining the future of enterprise voice analytics, whatever that meant. The company had raised $11 million in Series A funding and had 12 employees and an office in the American Underground in Durham, which is one of those co-working spaces full of standing desks and cold brew on tap and motivational quotes stenciled on exposed brick. Bryce drove a pearl white 2020 Tesla Model X. He wore wireless earbuds the size of Tic-Tac boxes and never took them out, not even when talking to someone's face, which is the kind of detail that tells you everything you need to know about a person. He moved into 212 Longleaf Drive, the house directly next to Ray's, on a Thursday morning in late March of 2018. 2 moving trucks and a crew of 4 men who worked under Bryce's very vocal direction while he stood in the driveway with a green juice pointing at things. He didn't carry a single box, not one. The first red flag came before the trucks were even unloaded. Ray was on the porch, coffee in hand, watching, not starring, just watching the way a man watches things that happen near his property, when the Tesla swung into the shared parking area and Bryce pulled directly into Ray's reserved spot. The blue and white Handicapped sign was right there, right there. Bryce got out, stretched his arms over his head, and glanced at the sign. And then he looked directly at Ray on the porch. And grinned. Not a mistake, not an oversight, a grin. He went inside. Ray took a sip of coffee. He went to the kitchen and picked up his composition notebook. He wrote the date, he wrote the time, he wrote the license plate number. He'd memorized it by reflex, the way old Marines memorize things without trying. He wrote 3 words, reserved spot, grinned. He underlined the word grinned. That was day 1. Day 1 was a Thursday. By Saturday morning, Bryce had parked in the spot 3 more times. The spot wasn't the only space in the shared parking area. There were 6 spots total for the 4 houses that shared the lot. Bryce had 2 empty spots available to him at any time. He chose Ray's every single time, like it was a game, like he was testing something. On Saturday morning, Ray walked over, slow, deliberate, carbon fiber leg clicking faintly on the asphalt, and knocked on Bryce's door. Bryce answered in a bathrobe, holding a French press coffee pot, earbuds in. Ray introduced himself, quietly, warmly even. He extended his hand. Bryce looked at the hand like it was a slightly unusual object. He shook it barely. Ray explained about the spot. The designation, the placard, the leg. He kept it brief and even-toned. He was not asking for sympathy. He was stating facts. Bryce listened, or appeared to listen, and then he tilted his head and said, "Look, I appreciate the history lesson, but I park where I need to park. You want a different spot, talk to the HOA." Ray said quietly, "The HOA already designated that one for me. It's in the official records. I can show you the paperwork." Bryce said, "Listen, buddy, I pay $6,000 a month for this place. I think I've earned a little flexibility, don't you?" He smiled the way people smile when they think they've won something. Then he stepped back and closed the door. Not slammed it, closed it, soft and dismissive, the way you close a door on a salesman. Ray stood there for a moment on the stoop. He turned around and walked back to his house. He picked up the composition notebook. He wrote down every word. "Now let me pause here and ask you something, and I want you to think about this honestly before you scroll. Have you ever tried to be the bigger person with someone who took your kindness and turned it into evidence that you could be walked on? Have you ever offered a hand to someone who used it to push you backwards?" Drop a comment, tell me about it, because Ray Kowalski knew that feeling. He'd spent 22 years dealing with situations where somebody had to be the grown-up in the room. he knew exactly what Bryce Calloway was. He'd met men like Bryce before. Different uniform, same arrogance, always the same ending. April arrived wet and gray, and so did the problems. It wasn't just the parking spot, though that continued. Bryce parked there at minimum 4 days a week, sometimes more. He'd started doing something new, too, pulling all the way forward so his bumper nearly touched the blue sign post, like he was daring Ray to do something about it. But the parking was only the beginning. The second week of April, Ray came out to find a bag of fast food garbage, wrappers, a cup, a grease-soaked paper bag from a Burger King, sitting directly in the center of his driveway. Not near the driveway, in the center, placed there. Ray photographed it, picked it up, wrote it down. The third week of April, Bryce began hosting what he called team syncs at his house on Wednesday evenings. 10, 12, sometimes 15 people pulling up in Ubers and Lyfts, taking up every available parking spot on the street, music thumping until 1, sometimes 2 in the morning. Two of Ray's other neighbors, Linda Ferris at 216 and the Nguyens at 210, came to Ray's door separately to complain. They didn't know what to do, they said. He seemed like the type to make your life miserable if you said anything. Ray told them to document everything, dates, times, if they heard anything specific, write it down. Linda asked Ray what he was going to do about it. Ray smiled just barely. I'm already doing it, he said. First week of May, Ray came home from a doctor's appointment at the VA to find a folded piece of paper under his windshield wiper. He unfolded it, typed, unsigned. It said, "You might want to think about whether you really need that spot or if you're just using the system. Some of us have real work to do." Unsigned, of course unsigned. Men like Bryce never put their names on the cowardly things they do. Ray placed the note in a manila envelope, labeled it, dated it, filed it with the photographs. May 9th, a Wednesday, Ray walked out to his truck at 6:15 in the morning. He had physical therapy at 7 and found the right rear tire flat, not slowly leaking. Flat, like it had been deflated. He crouched down painfully on one real knee and one prosthetic and examined the valve stem. It had been depressed manually. Somebody had pressed a key or a pen cap against the valve stem and held it until the air bled out. Ray did not call Bryce. He did not bang on the door. He called a tow truck, paid for the service call, missed physical therapy, and wrote it all down. May 17th, the Nguyen's security camera, a Ring doorbell camera that Ray had quietly suggested they install back in April, captured footage of Bryce's Tesla, pulling slowly into the shared lot at 11:45 p.m., and its driver's side door swinging open briefly before the car parked and the lights went off. The next morning, Ray's mailbox, a solid steel post model he'd installed himself in 2009, had a fresh dent in the side consistent with being struck by something metal. Maybe a car door, maybe not. Maybe. Ray added the Nguyen's footage to the manila envelope. He now had 2 manila envelopes. He bought a small fireproof safe from Lowe's and began keeping them inside it. He also made a phone call. One phone call, old friend. He didn't say much, just, "Hey, you remember what I was telling you about? It's getting more interesting. You might want to hear an update soon." He didn't say who he'd called. Nobody noticed. June 4th, 2018, a Tuesday, hot, the kind of sticky Carolina summer heat that arrives like an uninvited guest and refuses to leave. Ray spent that morning on the back porch the way he always did, coffee, the morning light, the sound of birds in the dogwood. On the back porch against the fence was the rose bed. Patty's rose bed. She'd planted it in the spring of 2008, the year after they moved in. 12 knockout rose bushes, deep red, arranged in 2 rows. She'd spent a full Saturday in the dirt, laughing at herself for not knowing what she was doing, asking Ray to hold the plant while she read the instructions on the tag. She'd come inside sunburned and muddy and utterly delighted. Every year after she died, Ray pruned them in February and fed them in April, and they bloomed every June like clockwork, like she'd left something behind on purpose, like the garden was the part of her that wasn't gone. He finished his coffee around 8. He went inside to refill his mug. He came back outside 7 minutes later. The rose bed was gone. Not damaged, not pruned, gone, every bush torn out at the root and thrown over the fence into the alley. 12 rose bushes, roots and all, dirt still clinging to them, heaped in a pile on the other side of the fence like yard waste. Ray stood on the porch. He stood very, very still. A screen door creaked somewhere down the alley. A car passed on the street out front. A mockingbird called from the dogwood, 3 different songs in a row. Ray stood on the porch with his coffee mug in his hand, and he looked at the empty dirt where the roses had been. And then he went inside. He set the mug down on the counter. He picked up the composition notebook. He wrote the date, the time, the weather, the temperature. He wrote, rose bed removed, all 12 bushes, torn at roots, thrown into alley. He wrote what he could still see from the kitchen window, the arc of the thrown dirt, the angle suggesting someone who came from the right side of the fence, the direction of Bryce's property. He did not go next door. He did not call the police. He made 2 phone calls. The first was to a number he'd called before. The second was new, a number he'd been saving in his phone for 6 months under the name Tom/Ref. The second call was short, 3 minutes. He listened more than he talked. At the end of it, he said, Monday works for me, I'll bring everything. He hung up, he went to the safe, he opened it. He looked at the manila envelopes, the photographs, the typed note, the composition notebook with its careful columns of dates and times and license plate numbers. He nodded once, the way men nod when they've decided something. And if you think Ray Kowalski was going to let any of this go, if you think a man who survived Fallujah, who buried 3 brothers on a road in Iraq, who buried his wife in a garden that just got ripped out of the ground, if you think that man was going to let this go, you've never met a man like Ray. Here's what nobody knew at the time. Let me say that again, here's what nobody knew. Not Bryce, not the movers, not the HOA board, nobody on Longleaf Drive, nobody who ever watched Bryce Calloway park his pearl-white Tesla in that reserved spot and grin at the old man on the porch. Ray Kowalski had spent the last 12 years of his Marine Corps career not in infantry, not in the field, but in the Criminal Investigation Division. Military investigator. 14 years total if you counted the 2 years he transitioned into consulting after retirement. He had investigated fraud, assault, drug trafficking on federal installations, and 2 separate homicide cases involving personnel stationed at Camp Lejeune. He knew how to build a case. He knew how to do it the right way, the legal way, the way that holds up in front of a judge who's heard every excuse there is. He'd been building this one since day one. But that's only part of it. First person he called back in May, his old friend, the one who might want to hear an update soon, was Master Sergeant retired Thomas Villanueva. Tommy. They'd served together in the Gulf, been stationed together at Lejeune, stood next to each other at more funerals than either of them liked to remember. Tommy had gone into law enforcement after retirement. He was, as of 2018, a senior investigator with the North Carolina Department of Justice's Consumer Protection Division. The second call, Tom/Ref, was an attorney, Thomas Reeves, a civil litigation attorney in Raleigh who specialized in ADA enforcement cases and civil rights. Ray had been referred to him by the NC Department of Justice's Disability Rights Office, whom he'd quietly called back in mid-April. Here's the thing about that parking spot. The spot had been formally designated and documented by the HOA in 2007. That documentation was filed with Wake County. The ADA, specifically Title III and its state-level equivalents, carries teeth, real teeth, in North Carolina. Parking in a designated accessible space without authorization is a misdemeanor under state law. Doing it repeatedly, documented on camera, after being verbally notified, after being given written notice, that's a different conversation entirely. Ray had sent Bryce a certified letter, return receipt requested, signature required, on April 30th. The letter clearly stated that Bryce Calloway of 212 Longleaf Drive was unauthorized to use the designated accessible parking space at 214 Longleaf Drive, that the space was legally designated under Wake County records, and that continued unauthorized use would result in legal action. The return receipt came back signed. Bryce had signed it himself. After that, Bryce had parked in the spot 9 more times, photographed each time, time-stamped. 4 of those times captured on the Nguyen's Ring camera with the Tesla's license plate clearly visible. But Tommy Villanueva had been busy too. When Ray gave him the name Bryce Elliott Calloway, Voxify LLC, Durham, North Carolina, Tommy had run it through the databases the way investigators do. What came back was interesting. Very interesting. Voxify had an active inquiry against it from the Federal Trade Commission, opened in January 2018, 3 months before Bryce moved to Garner. The company had been marketing its voice analytics software to small businesses with representations about its capabilities that did not match the product's actual functionality. In plain English, they were selling software that didn't do what they said it did to clients who'd paid real money for it. Several of those clients had filed complaints. The FTC was already watching. Beyond that, 2 former employees had filed a complaint with the North Carolina Department of Labor alleging wage theft, specifically that Bryce had classified them as contractors to avoid paying overtime and benefits, then controlled their schedules and work like employees. None of this was in the press, none of it was public yet, but it was all real, all documented, all moving forward through the machinery of state and federal government. Ray sat across from Thomas Reeves in a Raleigh law office on a Monday afternoon in early June and laid all of it out on the conference table. The composition notebooks, he'd filled 2 of them by then. The manila envelopes, the photographs, the Ring camera footage on a thumb drive, the certified letter and its signed return receipt, the 9 post-notice incidents, the tire, the mailbox, the planted garbage, the typed unsigned note, a veterinary receipt. We'll get to that in a moment. Thomas Reeves looked at all of it for a long time. Then he looked at Ray. "You built this case yourself," he said. "Old habit," Ray said. The attorney nodded slowly. "I want to take this case," he said. "I want to take it badly." Ray said, "There's one more thing." He pulled out a photograph taken with his phone the morning of June 4th. It showed the rose bed, the torn roots, the raw dirt, the bushes thrown into the alley. He also pulled out a second photograph, taken at the same angle but from 2009. Patty in the garden, mud on her knees, a rose bush in her arms, laughing at the camera. He put both photographs on the table side by side. Reeves said nothing for a moment. "Her," he said quietly. "My wife," Ray said. "She planted them. She's been gone 4 years." Thomas Reeves looked at the photographs for a long time. "We're going to add intentional infliction of emotional distress to this filing," he said. "I'm also going to contact someone at the DA's office about the criminal trespass and the ADA violations." He paused. "Mr. Kowalski, what are you hoping to get out of this?" Ray thought about it for a moment. "I want my parking spot back," he said, "and I want him to understand that there are consequences." The attorney nodded. "He's going to understand," he said. "I promise you that." Monday, September 17th, 2018. 6 months and 13 days since the first morning Bryce Calloway stood in Ray's parking spot and grinned. The morning arrived cool and bright, one of those first breath of autumn September mornings in the Carolina Piedmont when the heat finally breaks and the sky goes a shade of blue so clean and clear it almost doesn't look real. 58 degrees, light breeze from the northwest. The dogwoods on Longleaf Drive were starting to turn. At 7:12 in the morning, a Wake County Sheriff's Department cruiser rolled slowly down Longleaf Drive and parked in front of 212. A second vehicle, an unmarked sedan, government plates, pulled in behind it. At 7:19, a process server in a navy blazer walked up Bryce Calloway's front steps and rang the doorbell. Bryce answered in a bathrobe, holding a French press coffee pot. Because of course he was. He looked at the process server. He looked at the sheriff's deputy standing at the foot of his driveway. He looked at the man in the sedan who had gotten out and was now standing with his arms folded, watching. "Bryce Elliott Calloway," the process server said. Bryce blinked. "Yeah. You've been served." He handed Bryce a thick envelope and stepped back. Inside that envelope was the civil complaint filed in Wake County Superior Court by Thomas Reeves, Esquire, on behalf of Raymond Allen Kowalski. The complaint alleged repeated violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, criminal trespass on a designated accessible parking space, 9 documented post-notice incidents, property destruction, the rose bed, appraised by a landscape contractor at $3,400 in plant value and $1,200 in labor, plus an additional claim of $120,000 for intentional infliction of emotional distress related to the destruction of property belonging to a deceased spouse, harassment, the tire, the garbage, the unsigned note, the mailbox damage, and civil liability for all documented incidents from March 28 through June 4, 2018. Total damages sought $347,000. Bryce stood on his porch in his bathrobe looking at the document. The sheriff's deputy said, "There's also a criminal trespass misdemeanor citation in there, sir. You'll need to appear." Bryce said nothing. The man from the unmarked sedan walked slowly up the driveway. He handed Bryce a second document. "Thomas Villanueva," he said, "NC Department of Justice. This is a civil investigative demand. Your company, Voxify LLC, is required to produce documentation and records in connection with an ongoing consumer fraud investigation. You have 30 days to comply." Bryce looked at the second document. Then he looked down the street. Ray Kowalski was on his front porch. He was in his chair, the old wooden Adirondack chair he'd built himself, the one that had been on that porch for 11 years. He had a mug of coffee. He was watching the dogwoods. He was not watching Bryce. He was watching the trees, the way a man watches the seasons turn when he's got nowhere else to be. He did not look over. Not once. Now let me pause here and ask you something, because I want you to sit with this image for just a second. A man who has survived Beirut, the Gulf, Somalia, Fallujah. A man who watched brothers die on a road in Iraq. A man who lost his wife, who lost the garden she left behind, who got up every single morning and poured her a coffee mug's worth of memory. That man, sitting in a chair he built with his own hands on a September morning, drinking coffee. Not celebrating. Not watching. Just being. That's what winning looks like when you've earned it. 3 weeks later, the FTC formally announced its investigation into Voxify LLC. A local Raleigh business news site covered it, a small piece, page 3 kind of stuff, but enough. The word fraud appeared in the headline. The company's Series A investors, a venture capital firm in Research Triangle Park, made a very quiet phone call to their attorneys. Within 60 days of that phone call, Voxify's funding was frozen pending the investigation. The civil suit went to mediation. Bryce's attorney, whom he had to hire personally, as the company's legal insurance excluded founder misconduct, sat across from Thomas Reeves in a conference room on October 30th. The mediation lasted 4 hours. Bryce settled. The total settlement, $412,000. That included $230,000 in compensatory damages, $120,000 for the emotional distress claim. The judge in preliminary proceedings had indicated she found the Rose Garden evidence, quote, particularly compelling. $42,000 in legal fees, $17,000 in documented out-of-pocket costs, and $3,000 specifically designated at Ray's request, as a donation to the Wounded Warrior Project. As part of the settlement, Bryce Calloway was required to never park in or otherwise obstruct the designated accessible space at 214 Longleaf Drive. Provide a written apology formally notarized to Raymond Allen Kowalski. Pay a $12,500 criminal restitution amount in connection with the misdemeanor trespass plea he entered in Wake County District Court. Thomas Reeves said it was the most satisfying settlement he'd reached in 14 years of practice. The neighborhood found out the way neighborhoods always find out. Linda Ferris at 216 saw the court documents, public record, and told her sister, who told 2 people, who told 6 people. The Nuyens printed the news article about the FTC investigation and kept it on their refrigerator for a year. On the block, there was not celebration exactly, more like exhale, like a breath a whole street had been holding for 6 months finally releasing. People started waving at Ray again from their driveways in the mornings, though he'd always waved at them. They brought things. Linda Ferris brought a sweet potato pie. The Nuyens brought a tray of Vietnamese egg rolls, still warm. A man from 3 houses down who Ray barely knew came by with a 6-pack of cheerwine and sat on the porch for an hour talking about nothing in particular, and Ray thought that might have been one of the nicest hours he'd had in a long while. Bryce did not have that experience. He didn't come outside much after September 17th. When he did, people on the street didn't wave, didn't nod. They looked straight ahead the way you look straight ahead when someone has made themselves into a person not worth looking at. The Voxify investigation ground forward. 2 of the company's former clients filed their own civil suits. The venture capital firm withdrew entirely in November. By February of 2019, Voxify LLC filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The moving truck came on a rainy Saturday in March of 2019. One truck, smaller than the two that came when Bryce arrived. He loaded it himself, mostly. No crew, no green juice. Not one person on Longleaf Drive came outside. Not a wave, not a word. The pearl-white Tesla pulled away from 212 Longleaf Drive at 2 in the afternoon and made a left at the end of the street and was gone. Ray was not on his porch. He was in the backyard, in the garden, on his knees in the dirt, painful, always painful, with a pair of gloves and a trowel. He was planting. By the following June, the rose bed was back. Not 12 bushes, 14. He'd gotten 2 new varieties, added them on the ends, deep red in the center the way Patty had planted them, soft pink on the outside edges because he thought she'd have liked that. They bloomed that June like they'd never left, like they'd simply taken a season off to gather themselves. Bryce Calloway, last anyone checked the public record, relocated to Charlotte, where he began consulting work for startups under a different company name. The FTC investigation resulted in a consent decree requiring Voxify to refund $880,000 to its defrauded clients from assets that no longer existed, which meant the clients got pennies on the dollar, and Bryce got a lifetime ban from certain business practices in North Carolina. His ex-wife filed for divorce in December 2018. The proceedings were, by all accounts, unpleasant. The house at 212 Longleaf Drive sold in June 2019 to a young couple, Marcus and Denise Acaffer, both teachers, who arrived in a sensible minivan with 2 kids and a golden retriever named Biscuit. Marcus carried every box himself. He introduced himself to Ray on the first morning, shook his hand properly, asked if there was anything he needed to know about the neighborhood. Ray said, "It's a good street, you'll like it here." He offered Marcus a peppermint candy from the jar on the porch railing. Marcus took one. He came back to the porch a lot after that over the following months, sometimes with Denise, sometimes alone just to sit and talk while the kids ran in the yard and Biscuit the retriever nosed around the fence. Ray taught Marcus how to maintain a garden. He taught him about the roses. He told him about Patty a little, not everything, just enough. The composition notebooks, 4 of them by the time it was all done, went back into the safe, sealed, labeled, the way a Marine preserves a record, because you never know when a record matters and because discipline doesn't switch off just because the war is over. Thomas Villanueva came down from Raleigh that Christmas and sat on the porch, and they watched the neighborhood through the screen door and didn't say much. That's what old friends do. They don't need to fill the quiet. Ray drank from his mug, not the good one, not the Tar Heel mug. He'd never drink from the Tar Heel mug. That one stayed on the shelf where she left it. But he was at peace. He was genuinely, quietly at peace. You know, I've told a lot of stories on this channel, and every time I sit down to close one out, I find myself asking, what is it about these stories that people connect to? I think it's this: most of us spend most of our lives being reasonable. We go through our days trying to be decent, trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, trying not to make a fuss. We see someone act badly and we think, okay, well, maybe they're having a hard day. Maybe they'll come around. Maybe I'm overreacting. And then someone like Bryce Calloway comes along and shows us that some people have never once in their lives been shown a real consequence. They've been handed everything. They've coasted on money and confidence and the assumption that nobody in their path has anything real to fight back with. They look at a man like Ray Kowalski, a man with a prosthetic leg, a quiet life, a coffee mug, and a notebook, and they see someone they can push around. They never ask the question they should ask. What did this man do before he was quiet? They don't ask what he's seen. They don't ask what he knows. They don't ask who he knows, or what he's been writing in that notebook, or who he called last Tuesday, or what the certified letter he sent you is going to mean in front of a judge 6 months from now. They just grin and close the door. And that is the last mistake they ever make in that neighborhood. So here's what I'll leave you with, folks. Never mistake a quiet man for an easy man. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never mistake a notebook on a kitchen counter for nothing. And never, never park in a Marine spot. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, hit that like button, leave a comment. I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't, because there are more stories like this one, more ordinary people who refuse to stay ordinary when it mattered. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll see you next time. This story is inspired by real events and public court records. Names, locations, and specific details have been changed or dramatized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental.